Professor, I can confirm it's now live.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start this session with the goal of discussing, assessing the thesis presented by Luís Fernandes. The thesis is called, it's a long name, Cultural Gestures and Virtual and Augmented Reality to Enable Non-Expert to Explore Systemic Concepts and Complexity. This is presented to the Computer Science doctoral program, jointly sponsored by the Universities of Minho, Aveiro and Porto. And I want to say thank you to all the members of the jury that are making this session a relevant moment in the academic life of Luís Fernandes. Thank you, Professor Xixian Ang. You are a senior lecturer at the University of Kent in the United Kingdom. Thank you, Dr. Fotis Diarokapis. You are a researcher at the University of Technology in Cyprus. Thank you, Dr. Jonathan Richter, Chief Executive Officer in Immersive Learning Research Network. Thank you also, Professor Francisco Isaac Campos. You are an Associate Professor at the University of Minho, and you represent here the Scientific Committee of the program. Thank you also, Professor Manuel Firmino Torres. You are Auxiliary Professor at the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Porto. And finally, thank you, Professor Leonel Morgado. You are Associate Professor at the Open University in Portugal and a member of the supervisor team. So you are representing the supervisors here. Congratulations to Luís Fernandes for having reached this moment. And I hope everything goes well with you in this session. So we are about to start. You have 30 minutes for your presentation. And I'm sorry for the delay, but there is a member of the jury that could not come. So this delayed a bit. But you are now about to start, okay?
So should I share my screen right now?
Yes.
Yep.
If you have a presentation, yes.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So I think everyone can see it, and my mouse as well, if needed.
Yes.
Okay. So hello, my name is Luís. First of all, I would like to thank all of you in the jury for your time and for reading my thesis entitled Cultural Gestures and Virtual and Augmented Reality to Enable Non-Experts to Explore Systemic Concepts and Complexity. As the name might suggest, the context and motivation for the topic comes from complexity itself, and it may be self-defeating to even try to define it because it goes against its holistic view, and usually defining something is more reductionist view. Rather, we refer to certain emergent behaviors and dynamics of complex systems, and the key property of what makes complexity and complex systems is emergence, which is often referred to or described as the whole being more than the parts. An example of that, as shown here, are the cohesion and adhesion forces an emergent property of water that leads to surface tension. There's the shape of droplets, shape of bubbles, ice forming on top of a river, for instance. But if we only look at these aspects, as I did in the beginning of my doctorate journey, it might seem that only physics is related. However, it goes way beyond that. There is biology, there is art, there is culture, there is meaning, life, agency. All those are not physics related. So many systems are characterized by apparently complex behaviors that emerge as a result of nonlinear interactions among a large number of component systems at different levels of organization. Here we got an example of what it takes to actually make a cup of tea, all those actors involved and those systems that are involved. So what exactly is our problem? What is the problem we're trying to solve? Well, they're complex to begin with, and they're hard to learn. Typically, learning about complexity, which is often referred to as complex learning in the literature, is accomplished through 3D visualizations in 2D screens, and the interaction is pretty limited. We see the opportunity here of employing immersive environments, including the whole virtuality spectrum from virtual to augmented reality, mixed reality, as it may improve the overall learning experience. We see the potential of these immersive environments. But there is a challenge when using these immersive environments. The first big one being the interaction within those, and then designing the actual experience, targeting different users with different cultural backgrounds, non-specialists, our focus here. And we then hypothesize that it's possible to use the process of complex learning about complexity, and also its communication through context-aware immersive environments and culture-aware interaction. Our proposal to complex learning is a combination of two factors. They are both grounded on the importance and multidimensionality of contexts. They're even a bit fuzzy to even divide, but just to get an idea, the first is enhanced visual and spatial contexts provided by location awareness, immersive environments, and somatic, embodied agency. The second factor stems from what is known as shamanic interface, originally introduced by Daniel Suarez in his books, and it means one single interface for every culture. But as Professor Morgado put it, my supervisor, we actually do more of the opposites. We have an interface that can be adapted for each culture, and thus the title of anti-shamanic interface instead. And this is expected to be easier to remember when using new devices or new technologies. So for instance, I would represent the number 3 without using my thumb. But if I were to ask my German friend, he would most likely use his thumb. We could also mention bowing versus handshaking and so on, depending on your cultural background. And this shows that even simple things are done differently by people with different cultural backgrounds. And this is something we really want to take into account and leverage. Particularly because through this, it is expected to be easier to remember how to use the technology. And results from our research group, from Carvalho specifically back in 2019, indicate just that. Using cultural gestures versus not using them, using the device-specific ones, is easier to remember. So it helps with the interaction, and we want to use that. There was no pre-existing method of approaching or achieving this overall goal, however. So we start with systematic literature review, including several thematic analyses within, and on how to teach and learn about complex concepts and complexity. This literature review demonstrates that context and gestures are not being used effectively for this problem. Context continues to really not guide the teaching practice. So there wasn't really a way of even telling if it was, if this was even a relevant problem to begin with. So we had to make our own method. We had to try ourselves, begin with something. And in this case, it's framed with design science meta method. And there are the 6 stages. We already discussed the problem and motivation, also the objective and the hypothesis. And next we'll go through the design and development, through the data collection, how we analyze that data that serves as a base and grounding for the narrative that is then used for the subsequent prototypes. And then we'll go through the user trials, how we did that, and the main observations, main findings, and how this actually influences the outcome of this entire work. So to test this hypothesis, we had the great opportunity through a Fulbright scholarship to interact with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes in Montana, United States. And we had the opportunity to learn more about their cultures. We were able to see firsthand how the natives are connected and take care of their land, the animals, the nature, all the symbols and rituals. And we noticed after being there for a while, that storytelling is a really big part of their cultures. It's how they transfer knowledge from generation to generation. This is a method that has been used for tens of thousands of years ago. It went to cave paintings, and now we have PowerPoint. But during our stay, we decided to base our case study on a child story that we found there. That's told by an elder from one of the tribes, Pendore. But even though they call themselves Kalispel, it's called Loli's Journey, the child book here. And it tells about the insight the natives, the people, gained from observing the Canadian geese while migrating back and forth between the United States and Mexico, depending on the season. The story is placed within the Flathead Indian Reservation, facing the Eagle Pass mountain near Kicking Horse Reservoir. And this is important because since we're aiming for a situated, context-aware experience, this is really important to actually place the users on what resembles this location where the story actually takes place. So after conducting ethnographic research on the Flathead Indian Reservation, we took our findings from the literature where we saw that there were 2 main clusters of complex concepts and systems, HAS and sciences, medicine, and everything life. And we analyzed the children books that we had access to and the on-site interviews to find complex concepts and to categorize them within these 2 clusters. Here we see that we see the support of collective phenomena, one property of complex systems. We did the same for every other property that is known for complex systems. Here it's under the complex concept of family and home bonding. And this was used to establish a grounded, less subject and more meaningful narrative that would then become the skeleton for the subsequent prototypes. Specifically, here we have an example of Luli, the main character, the bird, being born, and how the distance between the characters in the pictures actually means that there's a close personal distance, there's love and care involved, and all this supports the not only collective phenomenon, but the concept itself, the family and home bonding. We first started with a 2D video resembling the Flathead Indian Reservation, where the story actually takes place. These allowed us to fail fast, so to say, and remove and add some content from the narrative before actually trying to implement it in the immersive prototype in virtual reality in this case. From the 2D concept, we went to a 3D animated concept. This showed us that we actually needed to introduce an avatar to represent the person, the elder of the tribe that's telling the Lely's journey story and interacting with the user a bit more. And this also allowed us to visualize some interactions without really implementing them, right? And one of those interactions, for instance, is changing the current season from summer to winter, back and forth, for example, and reflecting that not only through the landscapes in the immersive environment, but also through sound cues and wind, changes in the landscape in general, more animals and so on. The last version is the actual virtual reality prototype. And the main difference between the animated concept, the previous concepts, and the final prototype is the agency that is given to the user. In the concept, the user could only look around with 6 degrees of freedom, move the head and like move a bit forward or backwards if needed. But in this final prototype, the user could also see a virtual representation of his or her own hands, enabling gesturing and drawing. Drawing and painting specifically are really big things in the culture of the tribes that we interacted with. And it's something that we wanted to explore and try to integrate in these prototypes. Although it wasn't the main focus, we wanted something that worked and not hindered the interaction of the users that were using it. So ultimately, we wanted to give the user a way of interact with the surrounding environment and progress in the story, in the narrative. This interaction is possible through an improved version of the Inmerse framework that we first developed a few years ago for another project. This improved version uses what's known as ontological basic data, so something that represents like a hand skeleton or the full body skeleton. And we only use this basic data to actually perform the detection of gestures, which are then mapped into commands that the application depends on. Originally, this framework was developed with 2 modes. It was acquisition mode. It's like a raw mode, following just what the device sends, and detection mode, or when it detects a gesture. But a new mode was introduced here for learning, because the decoders now can be trained, if you use machine learning, for instance, to record data directly through the framework. So it will be using the ontological basic data directly. And one more thing that we improved in this framework is that now the decoders are really plug and play. So there is no need to change the final application. They're only dependent on the incoming ontological basic data, which will always be the same because of this adapter that will essentially change or map the device data to the framework expected data. The decoder for the gesture detection specifically was accomplished through machine learning, specifically through a neural network. But even though that's the case, the neural network actually mimics a support vector machine because it performs better with less data. We did that because we wanted to use the standard for open neural networks that supported cross platforms. But here we see that we picked features that are rotation and scale invariant, which is critical when supporting different hand sizes, camera distances, changing the rotation. And for this wouldn't be possible actually without the collaboration we had with the Brown University in the United States, because they published a paper where they go through these features and how to actually use them. And we mailed them back and forth to get assistance, and we were finally able to use it on our prototypes. For the drawing detection, we use a neural network trained with Google's Doodle dataset, which is a really big dataset with small drawings. Here we detect the pinching with 2 or 3 fingers, which enables a drawing mode, and then this layer here with the drawing is sent to the model, which then detects that this is a bird. And in the actual experience, this will spawn geese in the air, and it will enable the migration animation. For user testing, our main goal was to figure out how they would interact intuitively if they have no prior experience with these technologies specifically. As our focus in the experience is more of non-technical users, non-specialists, non-computer savvy per se. Due to the known COVID restrictions, we were only able to test with 10 users. These 10 users were picked non-randomly, just for convenience because they live nearby. We pre-interviewed them about their dominant hand, vision and audition problems, how they would perform certain actions like holding a pen and so on. So we're able to see if we had to change or prepare something else in the prototype in case their dominant hand changed. In this case, we didn't, because all of them were right-handed, so we didn't have to specifically see if interactions with the left would also work. We listed certain tasks that were possible during the experience and observed the user's actions during the actual experience. And we finally post-interview them to get their feedback and try and understand their insights from the experience. So if they actually got to know more about the complex concepts that we wanted. When it comes to actions like looking and talking, we also recorded and observed them. Users demonstrated that they behaved pretty much as expected. This is yes here, which is 56% of the total observed interactions. If we go to exactly what was expected from our side, we got the first column here, then we got this one over here. So everything agrees, and also the 20 here, which they agree with what we expected, but not what with the answers they give in the beginning. And this accounts to 71%. There were also some cases where they either interacted when we didn't really expect, or they didn't do exactly what we expected them to do. And this indicates that there is some stuff that needs to be improved in that regard. But the majority of users after experience appears to have understood the importance of nature and wildlife to native, and even mentioned that despite rarely being used nowadays, similar things are even true in Portugal, that the appearance of swallows are as an harbinger of spring. The main observations from this test indicate that the prototype is suitable for all types of users with varying degrees of expertise in the relevant fields. The experience and its narrative appears to involve the users over time, to immerse them, and the users seem to act instinctively rather than really remembering what they answered in the pre-tests about some of the possible interactions. And the results also seem to indicate that context is indeed important, and context increases immersion during or throughout the experience. So with this work, we were able to establish a new method to explore complex concepts with immersive environments and cultural interaction. It's the first steps, not a finished method, but there was nothing beforehand. We were quite ambitious with the hypotheses we put in the beginning, and have no actual comparison to determine whether it makes it easier or not compared to other methods, although they don't really exist, but we could compare with 3D visualization. But the results in the end seem to indicate they do get the concepts, the complex concepts. So we have successfully found another way of exploring them. Of course, this only describes proof of concept tested with the Portuguese culture. It's a limitation, but it can also be seen as a new opportunity for future research. the narration should be changed to Salish, allowing further user trials in the Flathead Indian Reservation, but for that we would need further approval from their committees. Some of the feedback we got we could already use to improve the experience, like moving the subtitles when the head also moves, so the user doesn't actually lose the actual experience, doesn't lose track of what's happening around. And yeah, the prototype can then be expanded to expand and tested with other cultures, such as those in Central Europe or Middle East. Of course, this wouldn't be possible without all the collaborations between all these institutions, their funding and availability. Thank you for hosting me at different periods of my doctorates. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Luís, for your presentation. You are completely in time. So we'll now move to the discussion part. And I'm now asking Professor Jim Hang to start his discussion after thanking him again for the collaboration on this process. Jim, it's up to you.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you for the presentation, Luís. It's very clear to me what you've done in your PhD. My background is mostly in human-computer interaction, so my interest is mostly to understand a little bit your contribution from the point of view of gesture, interactions, and virtual reality design as well. So I'm mainly interested in how you approach your hypothesis, which is H1. I just quote from your thesis that combining cultural gestures, which can lead to richer interactions, immersive environments, and more context, is a better way of learning complex concepts and systems. My understanding is you design a system based on your stay in Montana, and you then translate this story into VR, and you design some gesture interface and test them among some Portuguese users. Am I understanding it right? Yep,
that's exactly right.
All right, thank you. So my first question is, what is the complex concept that you're hoping that your Portuguese users would learn from this gesture interface?
So it's there are several complex concepts actually being taught or mentioned in the story. One of them is the home and family bonding. In terms of physics, we have the V formations from the geese, and there are several others, but I cannot see you anymore. But essentially, we're hoping that the interaction doesn't help them learn directly, but helps them interact more freely with the experience, the environment, and ultimately that will lead to better learning.
Right. If I understand it correctly, the book, The Lully Journey, is really a book for children. Am I right?
Yeah, it is for children.
The teaching is really targeted at children. I just want to know a little bit why you've chosen adults in your user testing when the book is actually targeted at teaching children this concept that you just talked about.
I guess the main reason we picked them was for convenience at the time. At the time we did the tests last year, we didn't really we didn't have the possibility of gathering some kids to experiment, but overall because I believe that with kids interaction might prove a bit harder, and ultimately the complex concepts that are mentioned, like more specific stuff, I don't know how much you can get from interviewing them, because we did the pre-test, we did the post interviews as well. Yeah. And we consider that it would be better off with adulthood, let's say.
Yeah. So do you think using adults, does it still answer your research questions? Because you mentioned in the start of your presentation that this complex concept should be something hard for the learner. So it's not something trivial. It should be something that the user consider to be difficult to learn. I wonder if you have any evidence that this adult group consider this concept difficult for them to learn.
Yes, the complex concept that they considered the hardest to learn was actually the V formations, because it goes more into the physics and so on.
Yeah.
So they didn't really get how that happens to begin with. It's an emergent behavior from the flock of birds. Yeah, we just interviewed them. We tried to see if they would actually, we didn't test directly about a specific concept. We just saw if they're in their feedback and what they got, the insights from the experience, if they actually understood the concept of migration, what's really happening, when do they actually move, and what's happening in the surrounding environments.
Right. So your evidence of this is based on interview, yeah? So you interview them and they told you this V-shaped thing is difficult to learn.
Observations and interviews, correct.
And also, do you have any evidence that they actually learned it?
That's a big problem, because learning by itself is complex. So how do we actually measure if someone learns something? Of course, we can make them a test and see if they actually got the tiny details. But whenever they actually mentioned one of those complex concepts, I'll just try to pull more information from them. So I didn't give anything away, of course. I'll just say, what did you get from that exactly? How did that happen? How do you think that happened? And that's how,
So you didn't exactly measure their learning. Instead, you sort of identify from the interview what they told you and to somehow assess whether or not they learned something.
Exactly, yes. That's actually one of the limitations, because to actually know if they actually learned something, we should probably compare with something else to see if by just reading the story they would learn better, right?
That's my next question.
So we didn't really get to that, because we still wanted to improve the experience with this first feedback. And we think that it should be done in the Flathead Indian Reservation next time, not really with the Portuguese culture to begin with, to see what really makes sense to them. This narrative needs to be first approved by them before we actually conduct those type of tests.
Yeah. It's a really interesting case study to design something that is culturally meaningful for Portuguese users to learn something from a completely different culture. So I'd like you to describe a little bit, what work did you do to understand how your Portuguese user would find certain certain gesture to be culturally appropriate for them to learn this concept, this complex concept?
So on the
user requirement studies, to understand what kind of cultures, what kind of gesture will be suitable for these users in Portugal.
Yeah. So before the actual experience, we did a pre-test on all the users, and we told them, for instance, to pick a pen, and I would observe how they would actually pick that pen. I wouldn't test them directly to perform a certain gesture or a certain action. I would just tell them, pick a pen, show me how do you lift or make a bird fly, or how you draw something. Like those kind of indirect cases led me to have a set of Portuguese gestures, and a set of Salish gestures that we think that the Salish would use to interact. And then we use that to have our expected gestures in the experience, which is adapted in this case to the Portuguese. And that's how we did.
So I'm still trying to figure out exactly how you tested whether or not your design is effective in learning this complex concept, which is the family sort of bond, what you just talked about. So can you sort of be more specific about what kind of gesture is built into the system that is linked to this understanding of the V shape or the family home relationship? Does it?
So
I'm trying to.
So for instance, on the V shapes, that part would be in the narrative is triggered by drawing something. The user is given a frame, right? Okay. Is given a pen that he can grab, and then the user has to draw something. So again, we're not looking to learn directly through the gestures.
Yeah.
We're more leveraging the cultural gestures to interact with the surrounding experience,
Okay.
which then leads to learning. So
Okay. So
yeah.
So what you're saying is the innovation here is a specific gesture which is appropriate for the Portuguese population in terms of drawing the shape. And without it, it will be much harder to learn. Is it what you're trying to claim?
What we try to claim that if we have a set of gestures that are not cultural, it might be harder. Yes. Results that we have from 2019 from our research group show, at least they indicate that people remember more the cultural gestures rather than the device-specific gestures, non-cultural ones. No. So here we're trying to use something that the user actually uses intuitively in their lives already. We don't want them to learn something new. We don't want them to learn how to interact with the experience in the first place. That's what we're trying to avoid, right?
Yeah. So I think my main concern is the lack of comparisons. So ideally, you would like to have another group, the same Portuguese background, perhaps using a different types of gesture design, perhaps for the German or for another culture. And then you should be able to measure whether or not this culture-aware UI gesture is effective or not in the learning. So I'm not sort of getting it, how you actually address this hypothesis, which is the main one.
Yeah, like I said, that's a limitation. That's final part of like actually comparing with something else, right?
Yeah.
We already have results from 2019, so we know that in principle the cultural gestures make them remember more what they interact with and how to interact with the technology.
Yeah.
And yeah, in terms of the hypothesis, the comparison with the different media, which is a whole other problem, how to compare two different medias and how they learn differently. Yeah, it's a clear limitation. Yes.
Yeah. So in your view, what would you say is the key contribution to the field of UI design, apart from saying we should use culturally appropriate design?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
I'd like to know a little bit about your contribution to user interaction design, apart from saying we should use culturally appropriate method. What else are you sort of contributing? I mean, I guess culturally appropriate methods in design is quite a well-studied area, and people sort of generally acknowledge that it's an important factor. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of your contribution beyond this general statement.
Mm-hmm. There are not so many studies actually employing the cultural aware interaction. It's often like implied, not really reason. The experience don't really, they're not really done with appropriate interaction, so to say. They're usually device specific with specific devices in mind. They don't really think about the actual experience of the user. And here we came up with a new method because there was nothing of actually constructing something, grounding something on the literature, applying it, and being able to construct a set of cultural gestures that enable them to interact with an immersive environment.
Okay, so your claim is, your contribution is to prove that culture-aware UI is key in designing a learning system. Is it what you're trying to?
That's also one of the things, yes.
Right. And how do you make sure that this claim is generalizable based on one single case study?
Yeah, again, we have results from 2019 showing that they remember more using the cultural aware gestures. And yeah, I don't know.
Within the scope of this PhD, which from my understanding is one single case study, I'm just trying to get an idea of how generalizable your results are.
So of course you cannot generalize because we only tested with 10 users. We would like to test further in the Flathead Indian Reservation, and only then we could make them generalizable. What we have is indications that this actually works, because in the end, the people talk about the concepts and they go through some details about the concepts and they understand them. They seem to understand them through the interviews.
I think I'm fine with having 10. I think 10 users, especially during the lockdown period, was exceedingly difficult. I had a lot of students who struggled to find students, and I think you did a great job actually getting 10. I think my main question is more about you study a specific culture and a very specific subject area, which is the V shape and the family bonds. But they are a complex system. It's just so many different areas that we can explore, and also culture. There are loads of different culture we can explore. How do we able to generalize from Portuguese learning this Salish culture to, oh, actually it works overall in all cultures, in all complex system learning environments?
Of course, further experiences would be needed to actually prove that this is a method that works for all complex systems, so on and so forth. We didn't want to make something like too specific, because that would require non-specialists. We were trying to target non-specialists in this case. That's why it's a bit more general, not too specific in just one complex concept. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to other questions now. It's mainly about your stay in Montana, where you analyzed this book, Luli Journey, and you interview. Did you actually carry out any observation on how the adults there perhaps teach the children this really complex concepts, and how gestures were involved? And because you call it an ethnographic study, from my understanding, it was mainly analysis of the book and interviews. I wonder if there was any observations at all in this chapter, in this study.
Yeah, I was every day in the reservation, actually. So I was actually observing how they interact in the day-to-day. There were some interviews and interactions with people. Again, we didn't really target children just because it was a children's book. We just were trying to find something that made sense to their culture as it made for our case study, right? And we took our time actually to find this book, because we didn't really know what we were hoping for, actually. At the time, I remember I was too focused on the physics side of complex systems. Yeah. And that was a bit wrong, of course. And I later learned that it goes way beyond that. Yeah. And yeah, we didn't really target children, so I didn't really observe how they interact with children specifically. But I talked with anthropology professors, and all those interactions allowed me to collect several gestures that they use, how to change seasons, like with one arm going to the other side and so on. And yeah, it was observation, collecting data on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
So this is really helpful. So did you learn anything from the gestures of these tribes, and how do you then translate this so that they are more suited to the Portuguese context? Can you give me some examples?
So I'm trying to remember some specifically, but I don't know. I know that, for instance, changing from sunset to night is something like this in Salish. In Portugal, I don't remember the exact. I know we talked with anthropology professors to get what would be considered okay in the Portuguese culture, because that's ultimately what we're going to target in the tests. I don't know, like, I don't have any other specific that comes really to mind right now.
But the process is mainly to study the Salish culture and then talk to experts in the Portuguese context to try to understand how to translate this. Am I getting it right?
No, we try to get like a set of gestures that works for both by talking with some people and interacting with both cultures. one of the gestures, for instance, in the Salish that represents growing of a plant or a person is like this, opening the hand, right? Whereas in the Portuguese, when we did the pretest as well, they said that they would just do a pinch. So there's a clear cultural difference on how they approach something to resize or even grab something, perhaps.
Okay. You also mentioned the adaptive, the system is adaptive, the UI is adaptive. Can you be more specific about this? What do you mean by adaptive UI?
Sorry, can you be more, where do I mention adaptive?
You mentioned in the slide presentation that the UI is adaptive to the culture.
Yeah, because you can change the culture. So basically, by using the decoders thing, I could have a decoder for the Portuguese culture, another decoder for the Salish. And if I replace them, the system will just work. I don't have to change anything in the system. That's what I mean by adaptive.
I see. So basically, it's kind of plug and play. So you build, this is kind of my next question is the main contribution to designer of virtual reality, of especially learning type virtual reality. So your contribution there is to have some sort of API, if you like. The designer can focus on the content and not worry too much about the cultural.
Exactly. Yes.
Just plug in.
Exactly. So you can have different teams working on different things, and they'll just plug and play.
That's very helpful. I wonder if you actually explore how useful this is. I mean, I can see there's a really interesting contribution to designers and developers of virtual reality content. I wonder if you explored. I wonder if you've got any feedback from software engineers or software VR developers in terms of the usefulness of such system.
That is something that we did not yet do.
No. Okay. If you were to do it, how would you do it? How would you go about designing a study to assess the usefulness of the framework that you've developed amongst for software developers?
I mean, maybe we could even measure how much time one single person, for instance, takes to do everything versus having two different teams and then having the plug and play. I don't know if that answers.
Can you kind of propose a scientific study to examine these questions? So
what do you mean?
Methodology, basically. Describe how would you go about designing this kind of study? How would you do this study to assess and evaluate whether or not your framework is useful for software developers?
For software developers,
yeah. Because this is one of your contributions as well, which is a framework that can be so plug and play. And how do we know this is actually going to be useful at all?
So I guess the first thing I'll try to see if that ontological data actually makes sense for every use case, because we're assuming that it's enough, for instance, in this case for lip motion and gestural devices, but it might not be enough for others. So it's something that we'd have to actually test to see if each of the decoders is enough to represent what they want to detect.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I think I pretty much asked all my questions. Did I use up all the 30 minutes?
Not completely, but it's okay. Thank you very much for.
I'm happy with this. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Now we'll move to the next discussion, and I'd like to greet Professor Marlinda Klein for having joined us. Professor Marlinda is a professor in the School of Business and Management of the Unicinos in Brazil. Thank you very much for cooperating in this thesis defense. And you have 30 minutes to discuss with Luís his work.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I apologize for my mistake. I had some confusion with my agenda, so I'm late. I beg your pardon by that. I will try to be objective. There are so many things I would like to discuss, but I will try to focus in some parts that I believe I can contribute more significantly. So Luís, first of all, I would like to, to give my congratulations to you and to Professor Leonel by the thesis, the effort to run this research, to develop all the discussion and literature review and build the solution and test. So for me, it's clear through your document that it involved a lot of work, a lot of knowledge from your research group. And then I understand this document here as part of a collective effort. Nevertheless, I will talk a little bit about the thesis itself, the document itself, and the clarity of the main elements of your research. Is that okay to you?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Thank you.
Please, you can interrupt me anytime, okay? I'm very informal, so if you want to comment, please, just tell me. I will start I will follow a linear order, right? Not very complex, I will be linear. But when I started reading your thesis, for me, in the introduction, I missed the research question because I found the main hypothesis on page 3, okay? But I don't know if I missed something, but I couldn't find the research question. Later on my reading, I found some question in another chapter, but I believe, Luís, as a suggestion, I think clearly stating your research question here at the introduction would help the reader a lot, okay? You have done so many things, you have so much content here, but I believe some organization, I mean a more traditional way of showing your research, maybe it is needed in this document. Because if you are going to write a paper, reviewers will ask you, what is the main research questions right away in the introduction. So I was, through your document, trying to connect these key elements. So there is an hypothesis there, but what is the main research question? Can you, I'm sorry that I missed the presentation, but maybe this is my first suggestion, to organize it, clearly organize. And I think you could discuss a little bit more here at the introduction, the relevance of your main problem. Because in some part you say that you haven't found a pre-existing method to this hypothesis here. And you say, so it was impossible to tell if it was even a relevant problem. But I mean, you should argue, because regardless the existence of a solution, the problem has a relevance. So what is the relevance? Could you talk a little bit more about the relevance of your main problem?
So the problem starts actually, I also agree with you when in the introduction, maybe I should be a bit more clear about the actual research question. It says it's a bit implied and not really clear. So the thing is that usually we got simulations that we would like to do of some disasters and so on. And we have limited ways so far of interacting with those systems. So our challenge here is how to interact with immersive environments to explore these complex concepts. So then our hypothesis says that, yeah, we think that mixing not only the context, the visual context of the immersive environments that we get from the get-go, but also the cultural background of the people that are using the system actually improves the interaction in those simulations that we couldn't really do in any other way, because they're dangerous for the actual user if we try to mimic them in the physical world. And yeah, that's our actual research question goes more towards how can we interact with immersive environments to effectively explore complex concepts.
But do you agree with me, Luís, that the case that you used, it's not about something dangerous or something that we can do in the real world, right? So my thing is about maybe culture it is complex, but especially it is subjective. It is very tacit knowledge. So I think you should maybe, align your argumentation of the problem with the work you have done. Do you know what I mean? Because we are not talking about, learning a dangerous environment or something that we cannot access in the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about a complex issue, which is culture, that involves tacit knowledge, involves subjective knowledge. So I believe there is a need to improve this argument here.
Okay.
Well, let's move on.
I think our argument is more on the sense that these simulations, whether it's a disaster or not, it can be for urban planning, or if we consider learning to be a feedback loop, so the more times you go through that loop, the more you learn, then these simulations make sense for pretty much everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would we go and learn about the Flathead Indian Reservation without really going there? We just try to get an experience that makes sense for them and that can be actually interacted with by other cultures, not only them, but other cultures. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when I started reading the chapter 2, systematic literature review, the first thing I imagined that you would present would be the method of this systematic literature review. At the end of the chapter, I realized that maybe probably the first part, when you talk about complexity concepts, it was not part of the systematic literature review, right? I understood that the systematic literature review was conducted considering related studies, right?
What do you mean with related studies?
Related studies are studies that have addressed your main research problem, or they got close to your main research problem. Because when you discuss about complexity, which I liked to read, it was interesting, and you talk about learning complex things, and you talk about learning in context, it was right. Okay, it was nice to read, but these contents are they haven't come from the systematic literature review, right? I understood later, I don't know if I understood correctly, that the systematic literature review focus on empirical studies that they have done something similar to your work. Is that correct?
Correct. So before the actual literature review, we needed to understand a bit better what we're actually searching for. And that's why we have the backgrounds in the literature review before actually having the method and actually doing the actual search and getting the results from it. Yeah.
But I suggest, in terms of organization of these documents, separate those things, First, explain your theoretical background. And for me, it's not clear for me what is the main learning theory that you consider it to run your work.
Situated learning, is that what you're asking?
I don't know, because you talk about constructivism, you talk about connectivism, but you know, here I would like to see a session stating, you know, I understand complexity like this, I understand learning complexity like this. My main learning theory is that if it is situated learning, I would expect a session here on situated learning. And you need to go to Lav, to Wenger, to key authors to situated learning. I don't know if you understand my argument.
Yeah, I understand. And we go through all of these theories in the background. And then again, maybe it's a bit too implied that it's situated learning. We say it sometimes, but maybe it's not clear enough. And maybe we can explain it a bit further after when we actually make our choice, right? So, yeah, I understand.
So I understand that this document here needs synthesis, you know, in every chapter, an improved synthesis of what is really your focus. So I would expect when you talk about complexity and learning theory, a summary, you know, because as your thesis defend, these are complex concepts. If you use, for instance, a table or a figure or a concept map that help us to understand how you are understanding and defining those concepts, it will be very helpful to the reader, you know. So my suggestion here is make clear your theoretical background. And then that part of the systematic literature review, it's about the related works. And for me, personally, it's not interesting for me to check every single procedure you have taken to perform it. You can put it on an appendix. You know, I would like to see a very good discussion about the theoretical background, really background, and then a grasp on the related studies.
I see.
You know, checking the related studies is important to you as part of the DSR, because according to the DSR method, we need to argue about what artifacts already exist to solve the problem, and how our artifact is better than those previous solutions. So in this sense, I think running a systematic literature review about studies that propose something similar to your artifact is needed, okay? But it is a little bit mixed with the theoretical background. So I suggest to organize a little bit this document, you know. Maybe you could talk about the related studies and especially the prototypes that are in some way are similar to yours later as part of the DSR results, not here, you know. Here for me, and please, I'm speaking from my place, you know, I'm from the management area, I'm not from computer sciences. So for me here, I would like to see your literature part, and at the end of it, the key concepts that you consider it to you. I know in some parts you say, I'm understanding complexity like this, I understand in context like this, you have this. But in any part of the document, we can see a synthesis of it, you know, like your main constructs. Because later, for instance, you deal with some propositions, and those propositions don't mention any of the reference that you had before. You know, I will comment it later, but in some part you have some propositions that they make sense, but they are disconnected from your concepts.
So
I don't know if
the propositions actually come directly from the literature, so I don't see.
Yeah, but when you present them, you don't cite the references. Do you know what I mean?
They should be cited.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
because we start with 2 research questions at that point that come directly from the literature, with the 2 main clusters coming from the systematic literature review.
But there is a part that I can comment about it later, that you bring propositions without citing any reference.
It might be because it's just a bit before that, or I think, but they should be cited. If it's not cited, it's an area.
Yeah, but do you understand, Luis, that some parts are disconnected? You know, you can shorten. You can shorten this document so much because there are redundancies, and there are some parts that are, you know, repeated later. So you can simply, you know, approach your theoretical background, you know, derive the main propositions from that, you know, make clear what are your main theoretical constructs, and then it will serve as a basis for your method and your empirical part. So as I told you, please consider that I'm speaking from a different area, you know. In my view, all the content could be more straightforward, you know, without redundancies, and in more or less the structure that is used in a scientific paper. You know, I'm a little bit square about that. You know, I beg your pardon. I'm a little bit square. I like to read a thesis or a dissertation more or less in the same structure of a scientific paper, because it saves me energy. You know, I know exactly what are you asking, what is your key concepts, what are your propositions that are, you know, linked to that, and then you go to the method and empirical part. So it's more like a suggestion than anything else. Okay. Okay, I think it's in some concepts for me, you could be more explicit about how you understand them. For instance, immersion. I haven't found a definition of immersion. I haven't found a definition about immersive environments, which is a little bit tautological, because you say that immersive environments, you know, the surroundings in which a person may experience immersion. But what is immersion? You know, in culture is also a key concept to you. I don't know, but I haven't found a clear definition of culture.
Maybe not explicitly defining culture, but for immersion and immersive environments, we actually get the definition from our research group, from actually my professor, Luís Morgado, from another paper. That's why we don't have the actual definition ourselves, but we say that we're using their definition without one of the components.
Yeah, but I think, you know, as I mentioned to you, I understand it is part of a collective effort, but now I'm accessing your own work. So I would like to see those definitions very, very clearly, very, very straightforward, you know.
Yeah, we try to do that in the background just before the literature review, to actually define and be clear about what we want, but maybe it wasn't put in the best way.
Yeah, I would check immersion and culture. If there is a clear statement saying how you are understanding that, because culture, for instance, is a world by itself. You know, it's so broad, and there are so many differences, different definitions of culture. Well, anyway. Then, as I told you, the section 2.3 method, it's a little bit confusing, because I understand, oh, he is going to talk about the research method. No, it's the method for the systematic literature review. Yes. I would put that in appendix, you know, that in the appendix, and just talk about your related studies. Okay, I'm running out of time. So the same thing, page 32, you talk about your research questions, right? But for me, these are not the main research questions. These are the questions that you are considering to run your empirical study.
They're the research questions for the systematic literature review, specifically. And
so,
they start...
You know,
but,
okay, so you should explain that the intention was to make those questions considering empirical studies, similar empirical studies to your work. Also, because, you know, if I read the titles, I get confused, you know, what you are talking about.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I will go to the method because I'm running out of time. In the method, you don't need, in my view, you don't need to explain what every research paradigm means or every step of DSR are. For me, what is missing here is how you have conducted every one of the DSR steps.
So we have how we actually apply the method in practical application, the subsection of methodology, and we have detailed how each of those stages was used and what of all these tasks that we performed during the doctorate apply to all of those stages. So it's the subsection practical application, so 4.4.
Yeah, but I would like to see that in your method, you know?
But it's within methodology. There's a section, chapter.
But I'm in the methodology section here, and you are presenting the SCR without details. They come later on, you know.
Sorry, are you talking about methods from systematic literature review?
No. Method of your research, DSR.
Okay, so methodology. And
yes.
Yeah, and then we got the subsection 4.4, practical application.
Yes.
Yeah.
But here you have this map, which I couldn't read, okay? But no details about every step of DSR.
No, they should all be there. They're considered phases like 1.1, phases 4, 5. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
You know, I don't know if I missed something, but for me, it's not clear, you know. I can't find here this phase. I did like that. That phase I did like that, you know.
Okay, you mean like a diagram?
I don't have an overview. No, I don't have an overview about how you run every step of the DSR. I need it, you know.
Okay, that's something we actually presented in the presentation, a diagram with those tasks, and maybe it should be in the actual thesis. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
because it's put in text and not as a diagram, so you cannot really get an overview so quick. Okay.
Yeah, but you know, I would like so much to see a diagram or a table or a summary of how you have conducted every step of DSR.
Yep.
How the result of one phase led to the other.
Yep.
The interactions, how many interactions have you done, you know? So I don't have this information here. If you are going to write a paper about your thesis, you have to do that. You know, you have to, in just one method session, explain how you have applied every step of DSR. Because the case study, for instance, you have a chapter just to talk about the case. The case is part of the DSR. It's part of understanding the problem. It's part of developing the prototype. You know, but it has to be, because as you mentioned, DSR is a meta method.
Mm-hmm.
The case is just part of it. So, you know, it's a little bit confusing. We can't reach the overview of the method. So I suggest really to design or, you know, to make a summary of how you navigate every one of the steps. Because for me, it was not clear, although you have the information throughout the document.
Yeah, again, we have the subsection 4.4, and we put it into text, all the iterations, what we get from one phase to another.
For me, it's not well organized by phases. For me, it's not clear, you know. Okay. And there are some details there that are not interesting. I understand it's your journey, but for me, some operational part, for instance, in page 139, it's not interesting for me. I want to understand what you have done according to the DSR structure. You know, if you went to US or haven't been there, for me, it's not interesting. I want to check how you have applied DSR with rigor, you know?
Okay, but all those, like going to the US, for me, it's an essential part of the process. Without going there, I wouldn't have collected all the data I did.
I understand, but you have to organize this information according to the phases. In which phase it, you know, it's part of which phase, which part of the method, what it has, what was the result of that part, because, you know, some details are about your PhD, not your research method. I want to know about your research method, not your PhD. So I think here you could maybe, you know, revise a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Regarding the case, chapter 5, I think at the beginning of it, you should explain why this case is relevant. Why this case is relevant, why it is a complex issue, why this particular culture is interesting, because you say, you know, and later you say as well, it was a little bit about convenience, but this is not the main argument. You have to say about why this case is important to your purposes. Well, I will to the end because my time is.
I'd just like to say that the reason we picked this case study was not for actual convenience, because we thought about it before applying to the Fulbright scholarship. So why did we apply? We already had contacts actually with Professor Jonathan in the reservation, and we knew that tribes are known for being more connected with culture, with rituals. So we thought it would be a strikingly different experience than those we would be able to achieve in Central Europe, something totally different that we can then in future research compare. So that was the main reason we had this case study.
Check if this argument is here. I'm not sure.
Okay.
For me now it's clear, but I don't know if you have this right away when you show the case, okay? Yeah. Finally, I agree with Ang about the results. I agree with him that you should be more clear about your main results at the end of the document, you know, because your work is interdisciplinary. So you need to comment, because it's just a small part to talk about your results. You know, you have showed so much data and the content, but when you come to your results, you are so, you know, brief about your contribution. So there I agree with Ang, you need to be clear. And you, especially to your main area, it is an interdisciplinary work, but for the computer science, what is your main contribution? You know, why the solution we have provided is different from the previous ones. So I think this part of the contribution, I agree with Ang, you need to, you know, spend a little bit energy clarifying that. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you for the comments.
Sorry for, you know, taking so long, but anyway.
Thank you for this lively discussion. And we'll now proceed to the third main discussion led by Professor Jonathan Richard. So I ask you to take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, Luís. Good to see you all. This is a very ambitious project. This is fantastic. I wanted to thank you once again for the incredible effort that it took for you to make your journey to the United States, come to Montana and immerse yourself in the culture of this Silis, Kalispé, and Kootenai people, of which I am not a member. I'm not a representative, so all of the things that I am saying are, please take that within context. It was a huge challenge for us, Luis, with my busy teaching, community outreach, and departmental chair roles. And as we discussed throughout your stay here in Western Montana, that your few months here were really just an introduction and really an entry into the culture you didn't know. And honestly, born and raised here in Montana, I did not know the incredible systemic complexity of these people until I really started spending a lot of time there. So you got an introduction and an entry into the culture. We just got started getting our heads around your research and how it might find purchase in the rich context of these people and their storytelling as means to transmit knowledge and understanding. And I'm just wondering, I guess right away, after this time has passed, you've gone forward with your research by taking what you learned from your experiences here, if you feel that that was sufficient to represent their worldview just within the context of what you're doing here.
So yeah, I think it was a bit short in that sense. And that's why I think in terms of future research, it would be important to do research again in the Flathead Indian Reservation to actually get them more involved with the actual prototype again. Because then again, like you said, like it was more of an entry point. We were there and we weren't really sure of what we actually needed and wanted, because it had to make sense to both sides. And we weren't really sure of what to pick, right? And only like after half of it, we started to realize we found the child book stories and so on. So yeah, I agree that it was a bit short, and I would like to see like future research going again there and actually talking more with them, involving more people from the tribes in the actual prototypes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. I agreed. I just wanted to I think maybe having a caveat in your work, in your thesis there. I just wanted to take just a little bit for the rest of the committee to just throw out a couple of things there, because this is a really sensitive issue for the Native people, not just here on the Salish Reservation, but generally across the United States, and Canada. These people have been exploited for hundreds of years by immigrant populations who have come and not only taken their lands and et cetera, you know, that story, but even here on this reservation, there's some graduate students who came up and took some botanical cultural knowledge and then went and wrote their thesis and didn't get the appropriate permissions to represent things. They didn't have a feedback loop from the culture to make sure that it was represented. And I'm not chastising you. We did talk about and looked at going to present our work to the culture committee. The Salish have an independent culture committee versus the Kootenai. They're very different tribes that were thrown together by the United States as a way of, they put traditional enemies together thinking that they would self-implode, but they are working together, but they have different cultures. And we did go to talk to them, but I wanted to just a couple of things on the connected worldview of the Salish people. And this was very difficult for Luis and I to work through. There's just a lot of stuff in their culture that is wildly different than any Western culture. So the culture and the land are really intimately connected. The people, the animals, the rivers, they all provide meaning and identity, and it's all interconnected. It is systems thinking. There's no nouns in the Salish language, only verbs. That's really a bizarre concept for us in the Western world, but everything is dynamic. So in order to say a noun, you have to pin a verb in place. So this makes their entire worldview incredibly dynamic. And as they're telling stories, what sounds like, oh, get to the point, it takes them some time and they'll eventually arrive at what we think of as the point in our Euclidean thinking. The elders are these keepers of the knowledge. So they did not have a written language. So telling the story in the exact way with the right enunciations exactly said is the way that they would transmit stories over 10,000 years. And so that's another this access to this knowledge then is really only provided to people who ask the right questions by the right people under the right circumstances. And then there are certain things that can't really be discussed unless the timing or the situation permits, like coyote stories, which are creator stories. Coyote was the creator of the world with his compadre, the fox. You can only tell those stories when there's actually snow on the ground. That has implications for climate change, obviously. But the fact that knowledge can only be provided under the right circumstances to the right person, or that situations need to be said, those have sort of human-computer interface implications for these people, that if they want to release that knowledge, they want to see it situated that way. And so these are just some of the cultural relationship or systemic understanding. I would love to, I just wanted to get your thoughts on some of that in terms of, and I know we had some discussions, but now that you've gone here to this point, what are your thoughts on how we might approach any of this, these kinds of issues?
What kinds of issues? The context specific, or?
Yeah, like how might we build a human-computer interface that was sensitive to the right person asking the question under the right circumstances, or to make sure that there's snow on the ground before, you know, I mean, and that's just one example. There's lots of knowledge that can't be said unless
yeah, so right. I think that the potential here with the immersive environments, it's to actually set the immersive environment accordingly, so those stories can be told within that same immersive environment. So particularly, we try to have snow around while the story is being told, narrated by me, in this case, not an elder. So I try to take those things into account. But I agree that to move forward with this, of course, we need to go again and have again like the approval of the committees, have them more actually involved in this to see if they actually approve the narrative, to see if they can actually narrate and emphasize the storytelling as they do to pass knowledge. So yeah, I think the potential of these new technologies is there, but of course we have to see if it makes sense for them, not only for us, right?
Well, I would love to have you come back. You know, since you left, you know, I think in some ways you had your project had an impact on the people. They're actively working on some virtual reality storytelling development there with the Longhouse being represented with a variety of other things. So I think it would be very well received. But I just wanted to put that caution in there that, you know, make sure that you're going through the document and, you know, saying that this is kind of a prototype and that you would want to make sure that the culture was represented through verification by the people themselves. I think that's really important to make sure that that's stated.
I try to be careful about that, but yeah, I agree that maybe you can even go further.
I just like to really emphasize that in your thesis. Let's see, I had a couple of other, the cultural gestures, I think, is very related to that, and making sure that you said that the sunrise or the sunset. How did you? Do you feel that you're using the Portuguese subjects as testers of this? How did that work out, and do you feel that translation is effective? I know you've already addressed this a bit with previous discussants.
Yeah, so of course, ideally, we didn't really want to test, at least first, with the Portuguese culture. So we had in mind that we'd use the Salish gestures to begin with. And the elder is actually, the avatar is actually doing some of those gestures to give the hints to the user that's experiencing the environment. I think the translation can definitely improve, because, for instance, that of the sunset, I really don't remember the translation to the Portuguese. But I believe that some users then at the end on the exploration phase were actually mimicking that gesture to actually change the surrounding environment. So actually using the Salish, but being interacted by the Portuguese seems to kind of work, because they actually got the concepts. But in terms of usability, I think more exploration would be needed. Again, more insight from the people from the reservation would be needed, because at these later stages, we didn't really have any more contacts with them. So we kind of just built the narrative and then used the narrative and we tried to fit in with what we had, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it can definitely improve so that it can actually be experienced in better ways by other cultures even.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I want to say interrogation. That's not the right word, but from the scholarly perspective of thinking about universal things that go across these different cultures, but then also being sensitive to highlighting the incredible diversity and the specialness of each culture. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting as human-computer interface develops and we keep exploring these different things. We can kind of find where those boundaries are, where those commonalities are. I really don't have a whole lot more beyond that. I was just really wanting to highlight that, this is a case study. So really it only, it can't be generalized beyond its context. It's really only looking at one case, and that's what it's for as a contribution, I think. And there's just some initial steps here that you've taken. There's a wild, very ambitious in terms of complexity and cultures, and there's a lot going on here. I think the previous discussant in terms of cleaning some things up, getting some operational definitions, and making this more clear in terms of the different sections would be a great service to your work. And then just emphasizing that this was a first foray into these various complex problems, and that you're not representing the Salish or Kootenai people in this, but it was a good exploration, a good first step. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think you said the right thing. It's really the first steps into something that we don't, from what we investigated, didn't really exist on how to approach this in this form.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. We'll now move to a more short set of conversations. And the first one to discuss the thesis is Professor Fortis Lerocatis, to whom I pass the word.
Okay, Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Luis. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for explaining things to everybody. I have a lot of questions, but I believe that most of them have been answered already by other members of the committee. So I want to start with something that is not very clear to me, which is about the cultural gestures. This is part of your hypothesis. And I would like to, I saw your presentation, which was very good, I would say. I would like to explain to me or try to provide some more explanations about what you mean by cultural gestures.
Thank you. So cultural gestures are gestures, symbols that you learn in the culture you're raised in. So now I'm speaking and my hand is kind of floating here, like naturally, let's say. And we're trying to use all of these somatic movements, hand movements that are intuitive for you, for your culture, to interact with these experiences. Because we think that the downside of these immersive environments, particularly VR, is the forms of interaction, because different headsets or different gestural devices will support a different array of gestures and different interactions. And we're trying to find some actual standard here. And what's the standard? It's what you already know from your culture. So why do you have to learn something new if you already have it in yourself? So that's what we mean by culture.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So if I started correctly, I mean, I'm Greek. My gestures are going to be different than yours, for example, or than somebody else from another country. This is what you try to examine, yes?
Yes, yes.
So this is this comes to the next question, which is if you are trying to examine these cultural differences, cross-country differences, how do you know that you have something which is, let's say, concrete or more generalizable if you haven't tested different countries?
So it was only based on observation, of course, and talking with people and asking them to talk about something and then seeing how they actually perform certain actions. Of course, it's a really subjective topic. And of course, different people from the same culture can even have different gestures, perhaps, right?
Maybe,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So something that we actually have is like several gestures just for one specific action from the same culture as well, to try to take into account. But of course, it all comes from anthropology and so on, because they study that, and interaction with people from observation. But still, of course, it's not concrete. It's really subjective. And that's why at the end we try to actually test with someone, and we should test with the settlers to actually see if they make sense or not.
So do you believe, from your research, if you test the same, let's say, techniques in another country, like, I don't know, in the same continent, like Europe, you're going to have similar results? Or if you go outside the continent and go to, America or Asia, you're going to have different results?
We expect cultural aware interfaces to be positive, no matter the country, because we already have results from the Netherlands, I believe, from Portuguese culture, and they all seem to indicate that they're really positive in terms of remembering. When you retry the experience again, you actually use those gestures again. You're not learning something new. They actually it seems to indicate that they actually make sense to interact.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question is Professor G. Monk asked about it. In a way, I'm working on the HCI domain and VR. You have very few participants for your study. I understand there is COVID, and this is, you know, a big problem for your experiments. But how safe do you believe that your conclusions are? Do you believe that this is something that you can go out and say to everybody that, I know what you found, I read your thesis, but do you feel confident that what you found is something that can be generalized and say, this is what's happening or not?
I don't think it can be generalized because, again, it's just a single case study, right? So it cannot be generalized. It shouldn't.
No, I'm not talking about the case study. I'm talking about the amount of participants you had.
So I mean the fact that we have 10 users and then drawing conclusions from that.
Yes.
Of course, they're not really concrete. We say that we have indications. We can assume some stuff based on the qualitative and quantitative results that we get from them, from the pre-tests and the interviews after, from the observation. And of course, they're subjective. And that's precisely why we put so much effort on the literature review and to ground everything, every option that we took in the narrative and the prototypes to be less subjective in the end. We try to make it less subjective, but of course there's some degree. Yeah.
So you believe that you can generalize or not? That's my question.
It cannot be generalized only with these users, for sure. We only have indications that it might work.
All right, okay, thank you. Another question is about I'm going to go to VR because I'm working a lot on VR. First of all, you use some specific technology. You used lip motion.
Yes.
And do you believe you would have, again, different results if you had another technology? Because every device has limitations and advantages, obviously. So you think that if people were using, let's say, motion tracking suits with gloves and everything, would make a difference on the results that you found with 10 users?
So if you compare the gestural interface with gloves, specifically, you touch on a
Not
good
with
point.
gloves, with motion tracking technology.
Just with motion, okay. So I think if we were just talking about motion tracking, it won't change much unless the latency is too much with one of those devices. So it should behave more or less the same way. But if we're going to bring something new to the table, something like haptics, which is something that actually is missing from the hand gestural interaction, then it will definitely bring something new in terms of results, which I think it would be better. Then again, we're trying to not hinder the user too much with too much equipment. They already have the headset and they have the lip motion. We're not trying to be too invasive. We're trying to make it more or less affordable here, accessible. And yeah, I think with different devices, of course, you have to consider both limitations and the potential what they bring to the table. So the results.
So you believe that you're going to have the same results if you had a different experimental setup with other devices? Maybe you don't have this in your lab, but maybe you have them, I don't know. But do you believe that the result you have is going to be the same across a different setup?
It would be certainly different depending on the modalities of all these equipments, what they bring. But I think the more they bring to the table, the more positive it can be in the end.
Okay, so it's down to the devices you have, and you're going to have different results. And for example, also if you were, from my understanding, the users were sitting down.
Yes, it was a stationary experience.
On a table.
Yeah.
Do you believe that you're going to have different results if the users were standing, for example, and walking, or no?
So one of the problems with VR specifically, it's locomotion. And since it's such a big problem and we're not really focusing on this really big problem, and they're actually maybe targeting also elderly from the Salish, we decided to have a stationary experience. So we actually don't have that problem. But the problem with walking without having, for instance, the Omnitrack that you can
Maybe not
walk
walking
safely.
as such. I'm sorry. Maybe not. Maybe standing.
Standing, I don't think it would make much sense usability-wise, because maybe you would walk and then you don't have the feedback response that you need when you walk in the real life. So I think stationary experience really makes sense here because you're listening to a story. You cannot really move around. So we picked this because we thought it would make more sense to this narrative. It was a grounded choice.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Last question I have, because I don't have too much time. Let's say you start your PhD now and you have the experience from all these years you spent in studying and working hard on your project. What would you change? What would you make different to have, let's say, I don't say something, you know, better or worse. What would you change?
Of course, now that it's on the finishing line, of course, if I could go back, I would change many things, perhaps. I think mostly, like I mentioned before, in the beginning of this doctorate, I was too focused on the physics part of complex systems. And that actually slowed me a bit because when I was in the Flathead Indian Reservation, I was only looking to find those physics complex systems. So I might have missed some stuff that could be useful now. And of course, that after the journey, if you can go back, maybe you don't take a few steps, right? But I think in the end, we found a good pathway and it worked. So yeah, maybe I wouldn't change it.
Be more specific. What would you change then? What did you make differently?
So first, the way as mentioned also before, it's an interdisciplinary problem. It mixes many fields that when I began, I had no idea about, right? So of course, now I would know what to look for when talking about complexity and all that. So maybe my observation methods would change a bit. Maybe the experience would also change a bit. My approach in the Flathead Indian Reservation would probably change a bit as well because I would know what to look for. And yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Luis.
Thank you.
Thank you for your answers.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Doutoramento. Now we'll move to the next to the last discussion, and this will be led by Professor Manuel Firmino.
Thank you. Hello, all members of the jury, and congratulations to Luís Fernandes to your presentation and to all your work, to your very interesting work, and also the way you answer the questions in this session. It was interesting and I appreciate that. Also, my congratulations to Leonel Morgado and all the supervisors that help you to do this work. I will say some brief general comments, okay? First, I will give a little bit of three things: a critique, a praise, and a suggestion. Then I will put 2 or 3 questions just to hear your perspective, okay? Well, first, let's go from the critics. I hear you in this interaction with the jury saying that you think you create a new method of learning and so on. But I don't agree with, I find that that is not just to your work. I find that you develop a technique, a device, a very interesting use of this technique that we can see inside or within different pedagogical methodologies. Okay, and for instance, I find that you refer situated learning, Lev and Wenger, but I feel that you need to explore it better, those concepts, because your work is very linked with learning, okay? And learning has been studied for quite a long time We have 3,000 years of pedagogical wisdom already. So it will be interesting to see more development and more contextualization with learning theories, especially also with social constructivism, with Vygotsky and Brunner and so on, okay? I find that can be better. Second situation, well, I must praise your work and give you, again, my congratulations, because I find a very structured and excellent and organized and very well written document, and with very good references. Also, I find this a very interesting exploratory study, because your sample is limited, of course, but you raise several new issues that are really very interesting from the learning perspective. Well, I find that there are some problems, a weak prototype, a limited sample, a narrow, very narrow conclusion. Honestly, I expect more investment in your conclusion, especially in the pedagogical perspective. Also, you didn't call, for instance, you didn't call the main concepts of your systematic learning review about complexity. I saw a lot of theory and considerations and so on about that in the beginning, in the introduction, in the literature review, but nothing in the end. Well, and I find there is a lack of articulation, of linking, okay, between a very rich systematic literature review. I give you, again, my congratulations by that, but then it lacks the articulation with your results and the conclusion, especially, okay? There is very narrow, your conclusion, to, for me, an outstanding work, okay? So also, I find that you didn't demonstrate very well how you increase the comprehension and the communication of those concepts of complexity from your immersion instrument or technique. Also, I feel that you measure a lot of data, but not the expected outcome. You made a very weak demonstration, and let's say there is not any clear demonstration and evaluation of the learning, of better learning outcomes. And that I agree, I fully agree with Professor Jim Ang when he talk about comparisons that are missing here. I suggest you that you can do that with different cultures, also, as Professor Fotis told. And also I agree with Professor Merlinda when she said that this doesn't give good opportunities to active learning, okay? And I give you here a suggestion that you can introduce, for the first problem that Jim Ang told, you can introduce more summative assessment in the end. Okay, try to classify the level of learning that you obtain with each subject. Another suggestion, it will be the formative assessment. Let's say to promote more interaction with the device, okay? It will be a very good improvement if you allow the system to create more interaction human-computer, okay? Allowing the learner to correct the process of learning and to improve it by himself, okay? Having more autonomy, responsibility in learning and so on. So, and that's my comments. 2 or 3 questions very quickly. The first is this. I am a little bit concerned if we lose that holistic perspective that you mentioned about complexity, because when you said in page 16, when you extract what at the first sight, it's more interesting to the learning, and then you highlight that. So this, for me, is highlighting details. Are not we losing the holistic perspective?
Can you repeat the part on page 16 that you're pointing out? Sorry.
Yes, you said something like I extract what is at the first sight more interesting to learning, okay? So you isolate some elements and you try to highlight it, okay, in the learning process, in the attempts to construct better representation models, okay? But I question if we are not unbalancing between the details and the holistic vision.
I'm trying to find the specific parts you're mentioning, but I'm not able. So page 16.
It was the first document I received. I want just a general answer from you. Aren't you a little bit afraid or concerned in that unbalanced situation between the details and isolate them, and then trying to create a better holistic vision of the learning contents?
Of course, we cannot say that this was the right way of constructing the learning experience, the right amount of detail or not. There has to be a balance, and we're trying to ultimately target the non-specialists. That's why we opted to not put so many details into it. And yeah, I'm not sure I understood fully your question again. I'm so sorry. Because I was trying to
I accept your perspective is we need to balance from each situation, because this is a theoretical issue, okay, not very simple to address. But second question, I wonder if we want to go to other target population, don't you think your device will stimulate, or you will need to do a lot of job to adapt to new cultural profiles, no? Don't you think that will be a problem in the future when you extrapolate to other populations?
Of course, it's a big problem, because ideally you have one experience tailored specifically for one person.
Yeah.
And of course, the more details you want to get into it, and more tailored it gets, and more specific it gets, the less generalized it is. So again, there has to be a balance. Otherwise, we create a new problem instead of solving one. Yes. And yeah.
Okay, very well. So now I have 3 last questions. I give you all at the same time. You answer to what you want, okay? I think there are exploratory questions for your future research.
Okay.
Especially. Didn't you consider to use or to apply this system of VR and AR that you propose to learning with special needs, for instance, deaf and dumb? Because you improve a lot of the importance of gestures, and that makes me think in special needs, okay, in learning. Second, the 3 last questions, and you answer what you want, okay? Second, how to promote innovation with learning opportunities to increase intercultural interactions? Because in the last discussion, you mentioned a little bit that there are 2 different cultures, and especially Professor Jonathan Richer says about 2 different culture of natives in the reserves. So I wonder, beyond these difference and these specificities, will not your device allow to bridge, let's say, to link a little bit different cultures also? Cross-culture, you understand? Because that will be very interesting about using non-verbal to communicate better with the different cultural settings. And finally, do you know, I'm a psychologist, so my world is this kind of, well, let's say, transversal skills and so on, non-verbal language and so on. So my last question will be this. Once we know for a very long time that nonverbal language is very linked with our human emotions and feelings, don't you consider to study a little bit what will you bring with your devices with this proposal, what can we gain in understanding the role of emotions in learning? Okay, because the link between nonverbal and emotions, okay? I think that you lack a little bit emotions, but you have already done a quite big work, so I understand you cannot do everything, you must focus, but from your future work, what do you think about this? Sorry, there are 3 questions, you choose whatever you want, okay?
So the last one about the emotion part, I think it's something that we actually considered at some point to investigate. I think I even mentioned it in 1 or 2 places throughout the thesis, and it's a very good point, because depending on the emotions you bring to the table, you might entice different reactions and feedbacks to the user. So of course it can influence the learning. It's not something we actively explored here. It's it's a different approach, something we could add in future research for sure. And I agree that it can be positive if applied in a good way. For the first question,
yes,
which is about the inclusion of, for instance, deaf people. So
exactly.
during my master's, I actually worked with HCI for blind and people with vision issues. So I'm very well aware of like the inclusion issues that we have. And of course, if we want something like this to include everyone, of course, we'll have to tailor the experience a bit more to the conditions of the people that are actually using it. Here we're using an HND, so of course we're expecting the people to see the experience, to live it. Another way for deaf people, for instance, I don't know, maybe it's through haptics instead, through the subtitles, through the interactions. For blind people, I would say auditory, probably.
Because nonverbal also includes the tone of our voice and so on, okay? And that can be crucial
yes,
reaching the learning process. Okay?
Yes, I think it would also, yes, of course, in terms of future research, to explore how can we approach this for different targets,
yes,
different modalities, only sound, only visual, everything combined and so on, to see the actual result, how we can improve. As per the second question,
promoting intercultural interaction and communication.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the current system actually allows you to plug multiple cultures at the same time in terms of interacting with the immersive environment. So that's definitely something that's already possible. One bigger issue, however, that we would always have is that when you design the actual system and you're showing some interactions, like for instance, the avatar is showing some gestures by themselves, that would have to be changed. So that cannot be done entirely without changing the application. So that's an issue. But that's something that, to my knowledge, other doctorates are already focused on, to have all these actions that are shown in the environment to actually come from configurations outside the application, so they can actually change from different devices and be displayed by maintaining the same narrative. So yeah, all of these are excellent, good points, especially for future research. Some of those are already considered, some of those are not, because of the scope of the problem here, of course. And yeah, thank you for the questions.
Thank you for your answers, and good luck to your future research.
Thank you so much.
Okay, this leads us to the last discussion, led now by Professor José Caixá Campos.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Luís for reaching this stage of his PhD work. And I promised I would be brief at the start. So I basically have 3 questions / provocations. A lot has been said about the thesis, about the structure, etc. So I won't go into that, but I have here 3 three aspects that in a way have been touched already, because at this point it's difficult to find something new, but anyway, the first one, and I came mostly from a software engineering background, and on page 7 you mentioned that people resort to oversimplified models and abstractions for learning of emergent properties, which can induce them into errors. And what this led me thinking was whether the environment that you're building, if that's not in fact also in a way an abstraction and a model of the knowledge you want people to learn. And so in that case, how do you guarantee that you haven't oversimplified your environment, let's say, and the way you represent the information? Because in a way, I see your environment also as a kind of a model or an abstraction of what you want to transmit.
That's a very good question. So of course, that will always be subjective as well, as everything seems to be in this topic. That's why we always try to ground every decision of the narrative, how we actually build it, from the literature, so it becomes less subjective, as less as humanly possible. I think that's the way you actually make sure that you're not oversimplifying or causing like those errors you mentioned. Only by grounding yourself in the literature and using that information to build your prototype can you actually make sure that it's less simplified, in a way to conduct the user to errors, so to say.
And do you think that by testing it, or so through a refinement process, you can also improve the quality, let's say, of the environment?
Yes, definitely, because with the feedback we got, one thing was that the subtitles were just in one place. They were not moving when the headset was moving. So some people were either losing what was being said or losing the surrounding environment. So definitely there's definitely variables that we can improve.
Okay. Another topic, one aspect that I was quite curious about was this, you going to an Indian reserve and from Portugal, so it felt a bit, how did you think about this? But this has already in a sense been discussed, but what I would just like to ask you is whether you had any thoughts, or if you consider the fact that this type of approach, whether this type of approach is appropriate or not for their cultures, because in a way they have a very different culture from ours, and whether this, I was thinking actually during the discussion, there was this mention, and also in the thesis, that some knowledge can only be taught, let's say, or transmitted in certain circumstances, for instance, the snow, and something only when it's snow. And of course, you can put snow into the virtual environment, and then you create the conditions for knowledge to be transmitted. But if they are so connected to nature, might they not think that's cheating, because actually it's not snowing outside, it's just fake snow in a virtual environment, and they are being led into doing something that they wouldn't do because it's not the appropriate time? So how do you deal with that kind of
dilemma? That's another very good point that Professor Jonathan already touched before, but I think we could even potentially make experiences that are only available at certain periods of time to make sense to their culture. But it's something that we can only make sure by, again, maybe going there and talking with them, putting them into the loop of developing the prototype to see if they find this okay or not, if it makes sense to them, if it feels like cheating or not. But yeah, one possible solution, I would say, would be having limited time prototypes, I guess.
Okay. And finally, regarding your evaluation, If I understood correctly, the tables on section 9.3, I think. So where you collect the gestures that people would use to do different things. What strikes me here is that there were a lot of diversity in the gestures. So it seems that everyone used something a bit different. And in terms of how they would grab or how they would represent this or that. And the question then to me is, if that's the case, what's the implication of that for using cultural gestures? Because I don't know if the problem is with our culture or what it is, but in a sense, you don't seem to extract cultural gestures from that exercise. Everyone is doing something different. So the fact that everybody is in the same culture doesn't seem to make everybody use the same type of gesture. And so I don't know, what does that, what's the impact of that, or how do you deal with that?
So of course that within the same culture, there will be different gestures to perform the same actions. It's not a one-to-one relationship. That's why the system is actually supporting multiple to one in this case, because yeah, sometimes you grab with just 2 fingers. Sometimes it's more like with 3 or the whole hand. So all of that has to be taken into account inside one culture. So it's not one gesture. And here we try to have more or less generalized set from all of those answers to make the same prototype work for everyone.
Okay, well, thank you. Those were my 3 questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Isaac. We have still some time, so I ask one of the supervisors, Leonel Morgado, to make some final comments.
Okay, thank you, Professor Gabriel, and I must thank all all these jury members for this excellent analysis, very thorough dissection of the body of evidence, and I'm fortunate to see how it progressed. Luís got his hands on a thesis that required probably 6 more months or 6 more years of work, so it's really a large piece of work. It's very hard to reach a full global satisfactory cover it all areas approach. And it did cover so much in terms of learning sciences, so much in terms of development, so much in terms of user assessment. So it's really great to see all of this. I must congratulate him on this effort. And the only thing that pities me is that he submitted a paper on the proposal. He submitted a paper with an extremely large literature review for a journal, for a major journal, but now he handed over the thesis without the final paper of any outcome. So Luís, are you considering burying this in the sand until someday it pops up in history, or would you like to try and publish these results so that people find them when they search for work in this area?
Of course, I would like to be able to take all of these results and publish them out there. Actually, one of the things that led me not to push it too much is that I think we should seek the tribal committees again before trying to do so. So that's the reason I don't even have photos of the actual experience of Salish in the thesis, because it wasn't really approved by them yet, the final product. So I don't think we should do it without first improving the prototype with them. But it's definitely something I want to do in the future, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Let's go for it.
So you are done, I guess.
Oh yes.
Okay.
I've been with Luís for years now, so I'm thoroughly satisfied.
Okay. So this concludes the discussion. I want to renew my compliments to all the participants. Your analysis and your questions and your assessment is really important for the program because we want that the work done by our students is recognized and assessed by external reviewers. This is so very, very essential for our way of working. I would also like to compliment the audience in the public channel, and I will now end the public presentation. Thank you.